Okay, hello and welcome to all of you who have joined us today. Joining live from New York City, we have myself, Lara Bloom, President and CEO, Dr. Clair Francomano, the Chair of our Medical and Scientific Board, and Dr. Alan Hakim, our Chief Medical Officer. And dialing in virtually, we have Susan Hawkins, the Chair of our Board of Directors, and our Chief Scientific Officer, Professor Fransiska Malfait. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from all of us to all of you dialing in. Thank you to all of those who submitted questions. We're going to plow through all of them with you over the next hour, and you'll be able to watch this back with captions and translations on our website very soon. I also wanted to take this opportunity to say a big thank you to all of you who have sent in such wonderful messages of thanks and support for our mission and work achieved since we launched in 2016. We really are so grateful to all of you. I hope that there's no sound issues. Just a reminder that we are doing this live from New York City, so apologies if there's any sirens that go past. Okay, so we're going to begin with questions about our conferences and events. So without further ado, let us start. So the first question, why do you not live stream all of your conferences and annual meetings with saved versions for later viewing? And I'm going to take this answer. So I'm pleased to say that all of our conferences have been recorded and posted on our website. And sometimes they do take a few months to get online due to our capacity. And we're really excited that as of Nashville, we have been live streamed as well. There are really high production costs and staff time involved to provide full accessibility, but we do strive to do this for every event that we do. And we are also working on all of these videos becoming captioned and translated over time. I would love some information about your 2020 Global Learning Conference. When do you book keynote speakers, and what is the process for booking them? And I'm going to take that answer again. We'll be opening registration on January the 30th, 2020, and we really are so excited. It's going to be quite different to our previous conferences, and this is the first year that we've done an abstract submission process for our learning conference so that we could ensure we had diverse and fresh presentations. And we're booking keynote speakers at the moment, and we'd like to choose people that we believe will have the most appeal to our audience. And the next question is, what are your learning conferences for 2020? And I'll take that answer. Our European conference is in Paris in March, and our US one is in Arizona in July. We also have a conference dedicated to classical EDS in Houston in September, and another scientific and patient conference in Miami in October that's focusing on the comorbidities of EDS and HSD. And we're also really excited to be announcing our 5-year event plan in the next few weeks, so do keep an eye out on our website for that. Okay, so we're now going to move on to some questions about our financials and our organization. So the first question is, what are your bylaws? And I'm going to hand over to our chair, Susan Hawkins, to answer that.
Okay, hi everyone. As we are not a membership organization, these are internal documents that are updated by our board of directors every 2 years. But if anyone has a specific question or concern, then please reach out to me at any time with any questions via the Ask the Society email address, which we will post again at the end of this webinar.
Thanks, Susan. And another question for you. Why are you no longer accepting patient memberships?
The Ehlers-Danlos Society has never been a membership organization because we want to have open access to all of our services and information for everyone.
Thank you. And another question, what do your articles of incorporation state you to be in terms of the type of organization, purpose, and founders? And could you provide a copy of those articles with redactions of home addresses, etc.?
Okay, the Articles of Incorporation describe what type of organization we are and our standard document. They are approved by the IRS and the Charity Commission to issue nonprofit status and determine what sort of nonprofit it is. In the US, we are a 501c3 charitable organization, nonprofit organization. Our EIN number is 38-2813140. In the UK, we are also a registered charitable nonprofit organization, and our charity number is 1180-984, Companies House number 107-22868.
Thank you. And another question, Will you make the organisation more transparent and give more public insight into how board members are selected?
In regards to our board, we have a nominations committee of the board who makes suggestions for new board members after examining the skills and characteristics needed, and the full board approves any request to join. We strive to make our organization as transparent as we can, and it's through events such as this that we want to hear from you on how we contribute to do so. All of our up-to-date financial information can be found on our website under About Us section. And again, I encourage anyone to reach out to us if they have any specific question or concern.
Thank you. And what is your policy and procedure for addressing complaints about behaviour by employees, volunteers, and other affiliated personnel? And if you don't have one in writing, will you create one?
We have recently gone about reviewing and updating all of our policies and procedure, and we have a written third-party complaint procedure amongst those, which will be added to our website once it is approved by the Board of Directors at their next meeting. We also have a whistleblower policy written, and it will be included in the employee handbook once the board approves it in the next few months.
Thank you. And a question, has Face2Gene or Kiani provided donations or financial support to the EDS Society? And I'll take that answer. And the answer is no. To date, neither Face2Gene or Kiani have ever provided donations or financial support to our organisation. And the next question, in a tweet made on October the 12th, 2019, Lara Bloom stated that the Ehlers-Danlos Society would release a statement addressing the name discrepancy on our 990 tax forms. Will you please provide the above reference statement? And I'll take that answer. That statement is on our website, and it has been since October. And you can find it on our website under About Us. And if you scroll down to the bottom under Financial Information, it's all there. And our name change took effect officially in 2018 with State of Incorporation. The next question, has Ehlers-Danlos UK donated money to the Ehlers-Danlos Society? And again, I'll take that question, and the answer is yes. In 2016, they donated towards the international symposium that was held in New York City. And the next question, why do your financial disclosures not exist on your website, nor by the links to the states you've listed? Please provide for the current tax year. And I'll take that answer. The 990s are on our About Us page and go right up to 2018. And the links to the state disclosures are on the giving page where we're required to place that information. And the next question, filings for your EIN for 3828134140 for years 2013 to 2017 on IRS Forms 990, Section B, lines 12A to C, Schedule 0, supplemental information, states that the bylaws require annual written disclosures of possible conflicts of interest. Will you please provide these documents? And I'm going to hand back over to Susan for the answer.
Okay, it is our policy to have signed conflict of interest forms for all board of directors, medical board, and staff and contractors. If anyone has a conflict of interest, this would need to be disclosed in writing at the time of signing or at the time the potential conflict arises, as is stated on the form, to be reviewed and disclosed as required. These are internal documents, and it is not usual for 501c3s to disclose this publicly.
Thank you. And the next question, line 14 of this form indicates that there is a written document retention and destruction policy. Could you please provide this policy? And back to Susan, please, for the answer.
Yes, we have a written document retention and destruction policy, but again, it's an internal document, and it's not usual for the 501c3s to disclose this publicly.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, please outline the organization's procedures for monitoring the use of grant funds in the United States. And I will take that answer. And it's determined by the procedures and the requirements of each specific grant. And at the moment, we actually have less than 0.1% of our funding from grants. But we do plan to increase this significantly and will abide to all procedures required to receive that funding. And the next question is, can you please explain the process used to award grants? And I'm going to hand that over to Dr. Clair Francomano.
Thank you, Lara, and welcome to everybody. We invite interested investigators to submit a letter of intent to describe the work that they would like to perform and for which they're asking money. A subcommittee from the Medical and Science Board is asked to review those letters of intent, and we use that information to select those which will be invited to submit full proposals. Based on the assessment of the letters of intent, full proposals are invited. These are reviewed in detail by members of the Medical and Science Board, and decisions are made by the board as to which studies will be funded. We judge the proposals based on the level of importance of the research question, the experience of the investigator, and the likelihood of success of the project. Now, no person who is an investigator on any of the submitted grants participates in either the review of the letters of intent or of the full proposals. And since we're ramping up on the number of research grants that will be awarded over the next few years, we plan to ask other colleagues with expertise in the area of connective tissue research to help the Medical and Science Board in this important review process.
Great, thank you. And the next question, on December the 16th, 2019, the Ehlers-Danlos Society tweeted that Christina Bloom had a teaching diploma from the Royal Schools of Music. Could you please provide proof of this diploma? And I'm gonna go back to Susan for that answer.
Okay, as with any volunteer that we are bringing on board to help with our organization, we ask to see necessary credentials to ensure they have the appropriate experience and skills needed. If there are any parents that had their children in any of the sessions Christina ran who would like to see her credentials, we invite them to get in contact with us and we will be happy to provide them whatever is necessary.
Thank you. And the next question, Lara Bloom's LinkedIn profile states she has a patients, representatives of medicine and research and development certificate without stating the issuing institution. Could you please provide proof of this diploma? The answer is actually listed on LinkedIn, and the certificate is with EUPATI, the European Patients Academy, which is run by Eurodis. And you can visit their website, which is on the screen there, to see me listed as alumni. And the next question, why has the Ehlers-Danlos Society not applied for any rare disease funding for VEDS, for classical and other rare types of EDS? And I'll take that answer. The process of applying for grants is really very time consuming, and it requires staff capacity to ensure that the application and acceptance and ongoing work to adhere to procedures and expectations that come with that grant are carried out. And up until very recently, we did not have the capacity to oversee this work. However, we are very excited to say that we now have a development team who are focusing on grants in 2020 and beyond, and will definitely be seeking grant funding for all the types of EDS and HSD. So that brings us to the end of that section. We hope that this answered any concerns or questions anybody had. But again, we do encourage anyone to email us at any time to askthesociety@ehlers-danlos.com if you still have any questions. So we're now moving on to HEDGE, our pioneering research study. And lots of you have sent in questions, and both myself and Dr. Clair Francomano, one of the principal investigators, are here to answer some of those questions. So for the first one, how did you decide on how to conduct the study, and who is involved in that decision making? And I'm actually going to take that answer because it's really a pretty incredible story. So at the end of 2017, we sat around the table with our board of directors and had a discussion on what should we prioritize over the coming year. And we all agreed that the one thing that would make the biggest impact to access, care, validation, and progression for EDS would be to try and find the genetic causes behind hypermobile EDS. Now, I know this sounds like a fairy tale, but I swear it is the truth. And the very next morning, whilst we were all still together when I woke up, I had an email from someone who expressed an interest to make a large donation to the organisation and wanted to know what we would do with it. So we were ready, and we were very quickly spoke to them, explaining our plans to raise money to find out the genetic causes behind hypermobile EDS. And really, the stars aligned, and we were so happy to hear that they agreed this was a priority and then agreed to donate $1 million, which is, it's really just astonishing. We immediately then went about bringing together the world's best minds in this area and created the HEDGE network, which comprises of experts from all over the world who have been working in this area for years. And there's never been a collaborative international effort like this in this area, and we really knew what we were doing was groundbreaking. So we very quickly arranged a face-to-face meeting with all these experts, all of who you can find listed on our website on the URL on this slide. And we arrived in New York to discuss the best way to conduct the study, and the HEDGE study was brought to life. And it really is so exciting, and we are so lucky to have some incredible experts associated with the work. It was so important for us for it to be global and collaborative, and we really look forward to seeing the results. And the next question. In the event of dissolution of the organization, are the HEDGE study, its data's DNA samples, and EDS Global Registry and its data considered assets to be distributed, transferred, or conveyed in a trust or otherwise to charitable and educational organizations? And I'm going to hand back to Susan for that answer.
Okay, the Society's governing documents provide that in the event of a dissolution, the HEDGE data, sample, registry, etc., would be transferred, in trust or otherwise, to another charitable or educational organization of a similar or like nature to the Ehlers-Danlos Society, as determined by the Board of Directors.
Thank you. And the next question. What is the contact information for the individual at Genetic Alliance overseeing the HEDGE study? And I'm going to hand to Dr. Clair Francomano for the answer.
So if you need more information concerning the HEDGE research, please contact Angela Ballard at angela.ballard@ehlers-danlos.com, or you can reach her at 410-670-7577, extension 108. If you are a participant in the HEDGE study, you may contact the Genetic Alliance Institutional Review Board if you have questions about your rights as a research participant, or if you have an adverse event related to the study. And that would be at irb@geneticalliance.org.
Thank you. And the next question, the HEDGE study release form warns that there is a risk that someone could relink your genetic information to you if they compare your genetic information to that of your other family members. We will require that any recipients of this information promise not to do this. What legal framework do you have in writing to enforce this requirement of a promise? Will you please share that written framework? And I'm going to hand over to Dr. Francomano for the answer.
Well, we require every investigator with access to the data to sign something we call a data use agreement. And the Ehlers-Danlos Society can enforce contractual agreements through civil legal action. However, we are really very careful to work with only partners who have a reputation for integrity, and we really don't expect the need to enforce this agreement. The HEDGE consent discusses our understanding of the legal framework regarding privacy of genetic information.
Thank you. And the next question, why should the international medical community accept the results of a study with no transparency and possibly under the influence of donors or tainted by confirmation bias? And I'm going to hand back to Dr. Francomano for the answer.
Well, firstly, I would like to assure everyone that we really have given full transparency for this study and have all the information that our IRB requires and that is usual in a research study of this nature listed on our website. As Lara explained, we have a really incredibly experienced, highly reputable team of experts who are all involved in the decision-making and how the study is carried out. This is very much of a team effort and not being led by any single person. As you've already heard, the Hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos Genetic Evaluation Study, or HEDGE, was designed by the Hypermobile Gene Research Network and is being carried out under the supervision of an independent institutional review board. The study is currently in its recruitment phase, during which participants are being screened by experts in EDS and enrolled if they meet the 2017 criteria for hypermobile EDS. Once we finish this phase, the participants' DNA samples will be sequenced and the results provided to an analysis group comprised of experts in genetic bioinformatics. This group determines the analytic methods and the significance of the results. The HEDGE consent, which is available on the HEDGE website, describes the study in detail. We are really confident that the study design is sound, and we expect the results will be published in one or more peer-reviewed journals once it is completed.
Fantastic, thank you. And the next question is, have any members of the board donated to HEDGE anonymously? And I'm going to hand back to Susan for the answer.
Okay. The Society protects the privacy of any donors who wish to remain anonymous, and we are not legally obligated to share that information with the public. We can assure everyone that no donors have any rights to any work product of the organization, and we are so grateful to them for their support and commitment to making things better for our entire community.
Thank you, Susan. And that brings us to the end of that subject area, and we are going to move on now to website and communication questions. So the first question is, we've had quite a few questions actually asking about translated material to help in other countries. Specifically, the questions were asking about French and Japanese, and I'm going to take that answer. And I'm really delighted to say that we are working on having all of our content translated into Polish, Czech, Russian, Arabic, Hebrew, Japanese, German, French, Italian, Dutch, and Spanish. So keep an eye out, it's definitely growing. And the next question, are there plans to provide free webinars with continuing education units to physicians and other healthcare practitioners? And I will take that answer as well. We actually do have free webinars every month for both patients and medical professionals to attend. And CMEs are also available at our conferences. But we also run EDS Echo, which, if you aren't aware of that, you can find more information on our website. And EDS Echo is free to attend for medical professionals, and CME credits offered for every session. And we also advertise outside of our community to health professionals on social media with our email database and at all of the events that we attend. And the next question, it would be helpful if the presentations covered comorbidities and how to identify them, and presentations that cover the impact EDS has on particular parts of the body and body systems. And I'll take that answer. We make it a priority to ensure that all types of EDS, HSD, and all the comorbidities are covered in our conferences and in our resources. But I'm really pleased to say that when our new website launches in late spring, it will be much easier to find these things and access the information. And the next question. Do you plan on making a statement about the Reddit site regarding illness fakers? If not, why not? Okay, so I'll take this answer. One of the core pillars of our mission is to advocate for those whose lives are affected by EDS and HSD. And we collaborate and affiliate with other groups and organizations with the same mission. However, we do not own, operate, or control external platforms such as Reddit. But we have reported our concern with this and other threads, and we will always report to the platform where we were able to, such as in the case of Reddit's illness fakers. However, the problem is platforms such as Reddit must regulate their own platforms and follow reports of inappropriate or abusive content on their sites. And due to the nature of the internet, we're unable to take on the moderation of all content. User agreements like Reddit allow users to say anything unless it's considered illegal. And we don't condone what they are saying in any manner. And ultimately, we focus on our mission to change the narratives, educate, and raise awareness for change. And that brings us to the end of that section. And so we're now going to talk about research, care, access, and management. And there were abundance of questions in this area. So we're going to plow through those now. So the first question, is there a guideline to hand out to GPs for the symptoms of EDS? I love the idea of patient echo, and I'm going to hand over to Dr. Alan Hakim for the answer.
Okay, thank you, and great to be here with you. So there are various guidance on different websites that are helpful for the different concerns that arise in EDS and HSD. And certainly the Society is working on these guidelines, which we aim to put onto our new website in the spring of this year. So, for example, you can find really good general guidance on the HMSA's website and also EDS UK's website. But I'd also encourage you to have a look at websites within your own countries, the organisations that are representing EDS and HSD. In addition, the Royal College of General Practitioners in the UK has something called the GP Toolkit, and that's a good area to go and have a look at. It's available for anybody to access for free. Now, any GP or a group of GPs within a practice can also join our ECHO. It's free to join. The details are available on the webpage that Lara was alluding to, the ECHO webpage. And really excitingly, we actually now have 7 programs running, and we're going to be introducing more over 2020. So I would encourage professionals listening to look at the webpage, and patients listening to encourage their doctors to take a look at this.
Fantastic, thank you. And the next question, what support is there to prove that as a hypermobile EDS mother, you're not transposing your own anxiety onto your children? Children are being removed from their mother's care due to false allegations of fabricating induced illnesses in their children. And how can the society support these mothers and prevent the ignorance of EDS within the family courts system? And I'm going to take that answer. So we've been hearing from a growing number of families and individuals sharing their experiences of being diagnosed with a factitious disorder, either imposing ill health on self or more typically a parent on a child. And people have spoken publicly at meetings and shared the most harrowing and heartbreaking stories that have really had a profound effect on their social, professional, and emotional well-being. And we can also see that Ehlers-Danlos syndromes are being listed as a condition to be concerned about when looking for a factitious diagnosis. And we need to understand why this is happening and what role we have to support better understanding in our communities and among clinicians and social services. It is of immense importance to us as an organisation to let the voices of these families like yours be heard, and to find a collaborative way forward to start improving access to diagnosis and care for children and adolescents. No family should fear reaching out to authorities and health professionals at the risk of losing their children. So we intend to start this process with a roundtable expert panel discussion at the Royal Society of Medicine in London in April 2020, and that is an international conversation. So it's not just regarding the UK. And we're going to be bringing together senior clinicians, executive staff from the Ehlers-Danlos Society, Ehlers-Danlos Support UK, HMSA, and other charitable organisations, as well as senior clinicians in paediatrics, rheumatology and psychiatry, and representation from the Department of Health and Social Services. And the purpose of the meeting is to share experiences and to identify collaborative ways forward and priorities in research, and we will very much keep our community updated with the outcomes. So the next question, can you please summarise the discussions that happened at the roundtable, diagnosis and management of syndromes of the cranial cervical junction, and roundtable discussion that happened in September at the Royal Society of Medicine? Specifically, is there any consensus around both diagnostic testing and treatments for cranial-cervical syndromes? And I'll take that answer. So we're still waiting for the consensus statement to have been approved by those who were leading this meeting. And as soon as it's agreed, we're going to publish it on our website and social media channels. But the videos from the morning session are available now on our website to watch. And we also look forward to extending these conversations at our scientific meeting in Miami later this year that I mentioned earlier, that is focusing on the comorbidities of EDS and HSD. And the next question, will you work with national and government agencies to work out how to support our healthcare needs? For example, guidelines for symptom management and care pathways. And I will take that answer. We've been working really hard on this as we know how essential this work is. We are working with our Comorbidity Coalition, who we've been working with this weekend in New York, the International Consortium, and the European Reference Networks, and we've had meetings with the NHS. We'll be making an announcement very soon on the outcomes of these fruitful discussions and what our plans are going forward. And the next question, could we push US insurance companies to cover maintenance physical therapy? And I'm going to hand back to Dr. Francomano to answer that.
So to inquire compliance like this from insurance companies would be a really big job. It would mean passing bills in each state or on a national level, as has happened with cancer treatment parity laws recently. The Cancer Treatment Parity Initiative requires insurance companies to cover cancer treatments regardless of how it is administered. In other words, if it's being taken by mouth or IV. It has taken over 15 years to pass, with the majority of states, and there are about 43 of those now, and only became national law in 2019. This is something we would really love to work toward in the future, but it really would require an enormous amount of time, capacity, and significant funding.
Thank you. And the next question, why is it so difficult to receive a formal EDS diagnosis? Given my clinical presentation and verifiable medical history, why do I encounter roadblock after roadblock from medical professionals? My doctors act as though the word EDS is taboo. Any help or opinions would be sincerely appreciated. And so I'm going to take that answer. So we're fighting really hard to try and improve the diagnostic odyssey for patients. But it's going to take time to catch up from the 20-year period of very little progression and research that these conditions suffered. And our aim is that everyone receives a diagnosis as soon as symptoms arise, and that everyone has access to the care, management, and validation they deserve. Various ways we're trying to do this is with EDS Echo, multiple global conferences, translated materials, and a robust updated website. But we also offer monthly webinars, and we facilitate the work of the International Consortium. And the results of the international community coming together is really being felt. And we've had lots of progression since our launch in 2016. It's going to take time, but the future is hopeful, and we should really be optimistic that change is coming. And apologies for that siren going past. Can't control the noises out the window. So the next question, will there be any research into hormone influence? Are born females more likely to be affected than men? And I'm going to turn to Dr. Francomano for the answer.
This is an extremely important question, and we would really love to understand it more fully. It certainly seems as if born females are more likely to be affected by serious manifestations of hypermobile EDS than men. In my clinic, more than 95% of the people who come to seek help for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome are women. In 2017, the Society received funding from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI, to create the Comorbidity Coalition. And this brought together patients, clinicians, researchers from multiple different support groups related to the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes and the comorbidities associated with EDS. Our goal was to develop a common research agenda and to identify the most pressing research problems to address. The question of hormonal influence on expression of hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome was one of 3 of the top research questions identified by this coalition. There is a foundation which has expressed interest in funding this research, and we hope to embark on a study in 2020.
Exciting, thank you. And the next question, I've read that there's mounting evidence that all secondary conditions to EDS, example POTS, mast cell, etc., are now being looked at as part and parcel of EDS. That if you have EDS, you will in fact have these symptoms. Have you heard about ongoing research into that? And I'm going to pass back to Dr. Hakim for the answer.
Thank you. So yes, I mean, there's a lot of ongoing work looking at all of the associated conditions. And in particular, the working groups of the International Consortium have been asked to undertake a review of the literature that's describing all of this work as an addition to the work that they published in 2017. But there's also a number of new groups that we didn't have in the 2017 publications, including the Pelvic Disorder Working Group, Pediatrics Working Group, and the Skin Working Group. And they're all being asked to do similar detailed reviews of all of the literature in these areas too. In addition, the Hypermobile EDS and HSD Committee of the Consortium has reviewed the literature since 2017, looking at the evidence for associations with both HSD and EDS. The committee will be sharing their findings when they present their recommendations on the revisions to the hypermobile EDS criteria, which I will talk to shortly, because there are a series of questions on this. Not everyone with EDS has got these associated conditions, and among those that do, there are a lot of different combinations of concerns and also different levels of severity of symptoms and impact on quality of life. There's clearly a lot more to do to understand how these conditions are related to EDS and how they might inform prevention and treatment of symptoms in EDS and HSD. There's a lot of opportunity still for us to explore treatments for these conditions. That said, there are a number of treatments available. So the long answer there is yes, there's an awful lot going on, and it's a very exciting time for us.
Okay, and the next question: if hereditary alpha tryptasemia is a cause of hypermobile EDS, why is it not being discussed more? I was just tested for it, and it seems that many EDSs have POTS, mast cell gastroparesis. And if the TPSAB1 gene could be responsible, do you think that there should be more research into this? And I'm going to go back to Dr. Hakim for the answer.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting story that has begun to appear over the last few years. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that hereditary alpha tryptasemia is not a cause for hypermobile EDS. The question there is if it is a cause. We don't have any evidence that it is a cause. But what we do know is that some people with EDS or HSD have been found to have this duplication of the gene, the TPSA-beta1 gene. And it's thought that this may relate in some situations to an increase in tryptase within the blood. The thing is, though, that it's also been shown that this appears in around 6% of the general population. So it's quite difficult at the moment for us to understand how much this relates to EDS and how much this relates to the general population. The other thing that we have to bear in mind is at the moment, there haven't been any specific studies of alpha-tryptasemia in EDS or HSD. There are a couple of papers where the researchers have reported, and this was back in 2014 and 2016, they reported an association with joint hypermobility, and they also reported associations with signs such as scoliosis that they described as suggesting connective tissue disorders. But actually, they didn't look specifically at EDS or, as it would have been described at the time, joint hypermobility syndrome. So we really don't have specific studies yet on EDS and HSD. The other thing, and this relates to all areas of medicine and the general population, is we don't really know why some people with this duplication of the beta-1 gene actually have symptoms and some don't. And this is definitely an area that's worth exploring in general, but clearly a good one to explore in EDS and HSD too. The hypothesis in hypermobile EDS and HSD is that maybe there's an immune reaction that also arises following connective tissue damage. So it isn't just about the presence of the duplication of the beta-1 gene, something else has to happen, a kind of environmental influence. Now, this is a very, very early stages in terms of exploration, but it's certainly something that will become more clear soon. And I'm very aware that colleagues in this field are looking at this in detail.
Fantastic, thank you. And the next question, what is HSD, hypermobility spectrum disorders? What are the diagnostic criteria for this illness? Other than excluding hypermobile EDS, how would a doctor diagnose HSD? And what is ruled out first, other than hypermobile EDS? If HSD excludes EDS and is not a connective tissue disorder, how does it turn into EDS if symptoms progress? And I'm going to turn to Dr. Hakim for the answer.
Yeah, so I think there are several questions there, and I'm just looking at the screen here, and I think maybe only the first of those questions, that collection of questions has come up. So I'll work through all of them in one round. I think the first thing for us to appreciate is that the 2017 criteria for hypermobile EDS grew out of the Brighton criteria for joint hypermobility syndrome and the Villefranche criteria for hypermobile EDS. However, the term joint hypermobility syndrome also includes people who have hypermobility and pain and other signs but don't have the features of EDS or any other heritable connective tissue disorder. The other point that I think is important for us to realize is that not all people with hypermobility related concerns have generalized or widespread joint hypermobility, which is a requirement within the HEDS criteria. Their concerns might be a few joints in different regions of the body, or they may be, for example, in the small joints, the hands and feet. So bearing those two things in mind, if the term joint hypermobility syndrome was to be dropped, which was the expectation following the development of the 2017 criteria, another term was needed to describe those people who clearly didn't fit into the criteria, but would have fitted into the terminology before of joint hypermobility syndrome, or even previous to that, hypermobility syndrome. So the term hypermobility spectrum disorder was introduced. And in effect, it can be defined as people with generalized or localized or regional or peripheral or historical hypermobility. So that's different from just being generalized. People who've got musculoskeletal signs and symptoms that we relate to the joint hypermobility. So this is the hypermobility, and the joint instability is the reason for their concern. And they don't have any other cause that's definable, such as a connective tissue disorder, where there are clear definitions, or maybe one of the more rare skeletal dysplasias, or even perhaps one of the neuromuscular disorders or myopathies that might lead to weakness and instability in the joints. So in that sense, there is a degree of exclusion required to make the diagnosis. Now, there was a question about information on HSD, and as part of our website development, we are updating the information on HSD, so that'll be there in the spring for us. The progression question is an important one for us to also understand. So with regard to progression from HSD to hypermobile EDS, some people can actually develop further signs or issues over time, and therefore then meet the criteria. So they may not have those issues, and then they develop those issues. And this is actually not an unusual phenomenon. It's something that you see in lots of other conditions too. So, for example, in the autoimmune rheumatic disorders, like rheumatoid arthritis, for example, a person might present with inflamed joints, but really have very few or no other findings clinically or on their blood work that actually meet the criteria for the diagnosis. We then use the term undifferentiated autoimmune rheumatic disorder in rheumatology to describe that person and that phenomenon. But then some of these people over time will actually develop problems, and they then meet the criteria for an autoimmune rheumatic disorder, and the diagnosis is changed to rheumatoid arthritis if they meet that criteria. I think one of the really important things, though, and we've alluded to this a lot in relation to HSD versus hypermobile EDS, is that you still have to treat, and many of the treatments are the same. So using the analogy of the autoimmune rheumatic disorder, either way, the inflamed joints, whatever you call it, still have to be treated. And those principles really apply to any hypermobility related diagnosis. The joint issues still have to be treated.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. Can patients with HSD take fluoroquinolones?
Yeah, fluoroquinolones.
Quinolones.
Yes. Ciproflox, antibiotics like that.
Does the FDA warning regarding EDS and connective tissue disorders apply to them as well? And if so, why? And I'm going to turn back to Dr. Hakim, who can pronounce it much better than me for the answer.
So actually, there is no information on fluoroquinolones and HSD that the Society is aware of. This question did come through to us previous to the Ask the Society. And I think we have posted back that our plan is to, well, we have asked the Medical and Scientific Committee of the Society to prepare a statement on behalf of the Society about fluoroquinolone risk in HSD and EDS, and we hope to share this with you very soon.
Brilliant, thank you. And the next question, do patients with HSD require the same caution with surgery and anesthetics as per this recent paper, which is listed on the slide? And if yes, why? And if no, why not?
Yeah.
And back to Dr. Hakim.
Yeah, no, sure. So for people who won't have seen the paper, it's a nice review of the literature that talks through all of the various issues that people with EDS might have that might affect their preparation for surgery, the actual time they're in surgery, and their recovery after surgery. And it really looks across the board at all sorts of things, from neck and TMJ problems, all the way through to kind of pain management and physical rehabilitation afterwards. So that's the nature of the paper. I think my advice here would be that you know, the review describes a number of different issues that should be considered in any person, whether they have EDS or HSD or not, but we would be flagging these particular concerns in EDS or HSD because many of the things that are discussed in the paper also arise in HSD, and they should be considered. So I think the Society's advice here is that all your health concerns should be shared with your anaesthetist and your surgeon prior to the surgery, because knowledge might then influence what needs to be done before, during, and after the surgery.
Fantastic, thank you. And don't rest for too long, Dr. Hakim, because there's more questions coming at you.
Great.
And we had numerous questions regarding diet and EDS. So Dr. Hakim has summarized these in one answer. So over to you.
Oh, yes. So yes, so there have been several questions about diet and gastrointestinal concerns that were sent in. And these included things like, is there research in this area? And what are the causes of GI issues in EDS? And are there any guidelines on diet? So we're certainly working on guidelines in all of the comorbidities. What we do have at the moment, though, is a number of conference videos and webinars on these subjects, both the diet and nutrition subject and the GI issues that you see in EDS and HSD and the causes of these. So I would encourage you to have a look at our webinars on our website. There's one by Kazim Aziz, who looks at all of the aspects of GI concerns in hypermobile EDS and HSD. It's superb. Heidi Collins has done a great talk that discusses diet and supplements in this area. And then also on other websites, you can go to the work on the Ehlers-Danlos UK website, and there's a great talk on nutrition that's available there that was done by Lisa Jameson. So, you know, there's a lot of information there to take a look at. I'm also aware, talking with many colleagues in the field, that there is a lot of ongoing research in this area. And just to maybe give you an example of a couple of things that have been published in the last year or so, there's been a paper on diet that actually looked at the benefits of low FODMAP diet in patients who were previously diagnosed as joint hypermobility syndrome, who have been followed up for several years, and it demonstrated that patients with joint hypermobility syndrome seem to have a greater benefit than general patients who are on low FODMAP diet. So I think that's really encouraging as one example, and I'm sure there's more work ongoing in this area. Another example would be causes of poor gastrointestinal motility, which is one of the issues that we absolutely recognize, and abdominal pain in EDS and HSD. And researchers have been looking at the amount of the protein TNX in the bowel wall, and also mast cell related chronic inflammation. And another area, for example, is the relationship between the microbiome and health. So these are all ongoing areas of research that I hope will lead to much better understanding of why our community experiences these symptoms, but also different approaches to treatment.
Fantastic, thank you. And the next question, what is the Society doing about educating ancillary medical providers and staff about accommodations and modifications for children in schools? A doctor's note and a diagnosis does not work for many. So I'm going to turn to Dr. Hakim for the answer.
Yeah, no, it's a really important area. Yeah, there are a couple of resources that we have on our website that we hope are helpful. I mean, the first is a webinar that Shani Weber did, and it was published in July 2019, and it's all about coping with school in the presence of EDS and HSD. There's also a downloadable PDF, which is a two-part guide with sections for educators and sections for parents on schooling. So I encourage you to have a look there. You can also go to places like the HMSA's website. They've actually got a booklet that you can purchase from them. So it's worth checking on regional websites or national websites to see whether there other allied charitable organisations have actually produced material that might be more appropriate to the culture, the nature of schooling in your country.
Fantastic, thank you. And the next question, what strategies can be offered for individuals who are managing the psychological challenges of having a disability after decades of not having a diagnosis? And I'll take this answer. So this is a really important area and one we've been focusing on in 2019 and plan to continue to focus on. We're working with professionals on raising the profile of these issues, and their management will be, we will be publishing speaker presentations and webinars throughout 2020 and 2021 on these areas. And we're really seeing an increasing report of PTSD in the community because of that long diagnostic odyssey. And we are committed to increasing early diagnosis to prevent this. We also had a question about OCD and EDS, and this is also an area we plan to have a lot more information on in the future. And the next question, what is Dr. Balbena's position on factitious disorder as per this paper on the slide? It seems that he thinks it is common and needs to be considered quickly to save unnecessary evaluations. Does the Ehlers-Danlos Society agree with this position? And if not, why is Dr. Balbena the chair of the Ehlers-Danlos Society Psych Board? And do you think this sends a mixed message to medical practitioners? And I'm going to hand over to Dr. Hakim for the answer.
Yeah, thank you. I think the first thing I'd like to say is I've seen this raised as chair of the Psych Board of the Ehlers-Danlos Society. We don't have a Psych Board in the Ehlers-Danlos Society. So the first thing I want to just clarify is that Dr. Balbena is the chair of one of the consortium's working groups, the psychiatry working groups, which is an independent group of professionals. And he's not actually on the board of the society. So the International Classification of Diseases describes factitious disorder as the following, and I'm just going to read this out. A category of psychiatric disorders which are characterized by physical or psychological symptoms that are intentionally produced in order to assume the sick role. So that is the description of it under the International Classification of Diseases, the World Health Organization or Authorities structure. And what I would say is that there are many medical publications on factitious disorders. And within these, you read statements like, best practice guidelines recommend a reduction in unnecessary laboratory testing. And this would really fit with the opinions of the article, that one shouldn't be doing tests or repeating of tests that don't appear to help get to the answer. Now one of the focuses of the Ehlers-Danlos Society, alongside its work with the Comorbidity Coalition and the International Consortium and allied charities, is in promoting greater awareness of hypermobility-related disorders that explain the presenting signs and symptoms and health concerns in our community. And Lara spoke about this earlier in this webinar. We know that individuals and families have been mislabeled as having factitious disorder. And you've heard that we've got a meeting in April this year in London to raise our concerns and look at ways forward. We'll have representation from several countries and we'll be supported by families and patients who will be sharing the effects of misdiagnosis and the impact that this has had on their lives. Factitious disorders exist, but we absolutely have to make sure that we have a voice within EDS, and that's what we're going to work on in April.
Thank you. And the next question, is there going to be, or have there been research on siblings with EDS and other rare conditions to see if they could be genetically linked? I'm asking because my sister has Dandy-Walker syndrome and I have hypermobile EDS, and I was wondering if there was a link. And we're going to bring in, all the way from Ghent in Belgium, Professor Fransiska Malfait, to answer this question.
Yes, thank you, Lara. Hello, everybody. So indeed, this type of research is the topic of genetic research being done in many genetic labs actually over the world. And if siblings present with different, rare, genetically unresolved heritable conditions, mapping and cloning of the responsible gene or genes may shed light on whether or not these conditions are genetically linked.
Thank you. And the next question. I've been researching a molecule found in deep ocean fish called scyllo-inositol? Inositol, which appears to bond with and repair malformed proteins in a body. Is there any research being done into this as a therapy for EDS? And if not, is this something to be pursued? And I'm going to go back to Professor Malfait for the answer.
So to the Society's knowledge, there is currently no research being done into scyllo-inositol as a therapy for EDS. The therapeutic use of this molecule is being studied in the context of Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative disorders, but not, as far as we are aware, in the context of heritable disorders of connective tissue. Whether or not this is something to be pursued could be the topic of a research project. As with all drug discovery research, scientists would first have to work out in the laboratory whether or not scyllo-inositol has an effect on the malformed protein, which could either be collagen or other proteins in the connective tissues, and test it for safety and efficacy. This in itself could take years.
Thank you. Okay, and the next question, is there a connection between Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and Huntington disease? I had a CAG repeat of 43 at 19 years old, and I suffer from both. And I'm going to go back to Professor Malfait for the answer.
So there is no genetic link between EDS and Huntington's disease. Having both conditions is really a coincidence.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, how much grant money has been allotted and or awarded for studies regarding racial bias and its role in the diagnostic process, treatment and or patient outcomes for any types of EDS? And again, we'll turn to you, Professor Malfait, for the answer.
Yeah, thank you for this question. This is indeed an important area where little to no research has been performed to date as far as the Society is aware. And as part of the Society's research program on social sciences and education, as outlined in our research priorities, we would greatly appreciate submissions of these types of research questions to the Society's funding rounds, and they will be considered equally alongside all other applications.
Fantastic, thank you. And just apologies if anyone can hear screaming children. We are running this from the Balance Arts Centre, and it appears an entire truckload of children have just been delivered. So we will speak loudly. So the next question is, does the Ehlers-Danlos Society have any data to share on racial bias and its role in the diagnosis process for vascular EDS? And we'll turn again to you, Professor Malfait.
Yeah, so currently the EDS Society has no data available to share on this topic, nor for vascular EDS or other types of EDS, but as outlined before, this would be a very important subject to look into.
Great, thank you. And the next question, is there any upcoming research on or plans to research EDS and neurodiversity? Excuse me. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Hakim for the answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an important question again. So neurodiversity includes conditions such as dyspraxia, dyslexia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyscalculia, and also autistic spectrum. So really a diverse world. Now, these are areas where there has been some research showing greater prevalence in people who have joint hypermobility. And there have been a few studies that also suggest greater prevalence in hypermobile EDS or joint hypermobility syndrome. Now, the research priorities that Dr. Malfait was just describing that we published at the end of last year within the society do include these concerns as areas that we would absolutely encourage researchers in the field to come forward to us over and apply to our grant rounds. We would very much, encourage this and look forward to hearing more from people who wish to do this kind of research. Absolutely.
We have nearly $1 million for this year, so we do encourage people to get those applications in. And the next question, will you be doing any funding, doing or funding any research into if there are clinical differences between hypermobile EDS and HSD, or are you going to continue to divide the community, confuse healthcare professionals, and make up diagnostic criteria that has no evidence base? And I'm going to hand over to you, Dr. Hakim, for the answer.
Okay, so I think these types of research questions are also very important, and I'll be talking a little bit more about this when we talk about the criteria review. Again, I mean, if any of these are submitted to the Society's funding rounds, then they'll absolutely be considered equally alongside all others. We think this is an important question. We would like, though, to reiterate that the International Consortium produced the diagnostic criteria, not the Ehlers-Danlos Society. But, we don't work in a bubble. We want to be supportive and encourage anything that explores these areas.
Thank you. And the next question, can you discuss the stiff stage of EDS? What's the difference between stiff person syndrome and the stiff stage of EDS? And back to you, Dr. Hakim, for the answer.
Yeah, so I think increasing stiffness is something that can actually happen to anyone who's got any form of joint disease. So we see it in some people with EDS in the same way that it would potentially appear in people who have other musculoskeletal conditions, and it will arise as a consequence of pain and fatigue, muscle weakness, injuries, arthritis. All these sorts of things will reduce movement and function and lead to the joints feeling stiff. I was actually with some patients during the HEDGE study on Friday, and several of them were older than 50, and they were as bendy and subluxing as you have ever seen. So it isn't a phenomenon that you would automatically assume is going to happen. Some people stiffen up, other people don't. It's not inevitable. Now, stiff person syndrome is actually a very different condition. It's rare, it is progressive, and it affects the brain and the spinal cord, leading to severe muscle stiffness. It's considered to be an autoimmune disorder in terms of its mechanism. It's not known to be related at all to EDS.
Fantastic. And the next question, is there currently any research into hypermobile EDS and HSD and hearing loss? Is there anyone from ENT that could be recommended to help with these issues? And I'm going to pass over to Dr. Hakim.
Yeah, another really great question. So the Society is not aware of any current research on hearing loss in EDS or HSD, but we are aware that hearing loss is a concern raised a lot by our community. There's an interesting paper in 2016, for example, that studied children with EDS and found that 31 of 140 children that participated in the study, so that's just under a quarter of the children, had some form of hearing loss. What they found, though, was that the hearing loss was a mixture in different kids between the conductive loss, which is that problem in the middle ear, getting the information from the eardrum to the sensory system, but also sensory neural. So this is a nerve problem or an inner ear problem. And they also found that it could be in one ear or affecting both ears. So we absolutely recognize that it's an issue. We're not aware within the Society that there's anything specific that can be done for HSD or EDS that isn't actually part of general ENT assessment and treatment. So we would encourage you to have a full formal assessment by an ENT expert who is an expert in hearing loss as opposed to an expert in EDS or HSD. And I think my closing comment there is that we'd really like to hear from anybody within the ENT world who's actually looking into this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next question, is there research on whether women's health issues such as fibroids, endometriosis and comorbidities from EDS? And I'll go back to Dr. Hakim.
Yeah, so the most recent studies comparing women with EDS versus the general population actually haven't shown an increased prevalence of endometriosis in EDS. I'm aware that the Pelvic Disorders Working Group of the International Consortium is actually working at the moment on a full review of the whole area of women's health, which we hope will include guidance on areas for further research. But in addition, there is a really good webinar on the whole area of gynecology and women's health on our website. It's presented by Dr. Blagovido, and she's a gynecologist, and it was produced in March of 2019, so it's nicely up to date. Again, thinking about our research priorities, we have in our research priorities statement included treatment and outcome as an important kind of pillar. And so any studies that are looking at treatment of these hormone-related conditions and how well people tolerate them in the presence of EDS or HSD is welcomed, and another example of the many areas that we hope our grants can support.
Fantastic, thank you. And next question, I was wondering about the inheritance of hypermobile EDS since the gene is unknown, the probability and severity for children of a mother with hypermobile EDS. I've seen and heard a lot of different things on it and wanted to know what the Society's opinion is. We're going to go back to Professor Malfait for the answer.
Yeah, thank you. So hypermobile EDS appears to be an autosomal dominant disorder with gender influences on the degree of expression. As such, we see it running through families generation to generation. However, as with many genetic disorders, there is a wide variation in the ways the disorder can affect individuals within one family. The gene or genes responsible for hypermobile EDS are currently unknown. It is possible, for instance, that hypermobile EDS is one autosomal dominant condition with important variability in severity of the signs and symptoms. And in autosomal dominant conditions, the risk for an affected mother or father of transmitting the genetic defect to their child is 50%. So each child, either boy or girl, would have a 1 in 2 chance of inheriting the genetic defect. But as already said, as in many genetic disorders, identical genetic defects can produce different expression patterns. It is possible that a person has inherited the same genetic defect as his or her parent, but does not develop the disorder. This phenomenon is known in genetics as incomplete penetrance. It is also possible that individuals with the same genetic defect have different degrees of the same phenotype or clinical features, a phenomenon known as variable expression. It is also possible that hypermobile EDS is actually not one condition, but a group of perhaps individually rare autosomal dominant conditions, each with their own genetic defect in a different gene. Also in that case, incomplete penetrance and variable expression could occur. It is also possible that the expression of hypermobile EDS is influenced by multiple genes, in which case the inheritance pattern would appear to be more complicated. So the HEDGE study aims to find the genetic basis of hypermobile EDS, and the Society is hopeful that data generated from this study will help us in answering these important questions.
Fantastic, thank you. And that brings us to the end of that section and takes us into our last section, which is the 2017 hypermobile EDS criteria. So the first question is, were any of the board members involved in creating the 2017 criteria? And I'm going to hand back to Susan for the answer for that.
Okay, so no, there were not. We have no members of the board of directors on the international consortium.
Thank you for clarifying that. And the next question, was Shane Robinson and or Lara Bloom involved in any way in the revision process for the 2017 diagnostic criteria? And I'll take that answer. So Shane Robinson was not involved with the revision process in any way other than to support the symposium event in New York that we had in May 2016 and to ensure we had the funding and infrastructure in place for it to take place. And I had the same involvement, but also in addition, I serve, and I'm very privileged to serve, as a patient expert in the steering committee to ensure that the patient voice is represented in not just the content, but the planning and execution of the work. and ultimately I had no influence in the outcome of what the criteria was, nor the content of any of the papers. My name was published on the main classification paper to acknowledge my involvement in ensuring that the work took place. And the next question, is the criteria for hypermobile EDS changing in 2020? And I will turn back to Dr. Hakim for the answer.
Thank you. So the short answer to that is no, it's not changing in 2020. But just a little bit more background information. So in 2019, the Hypermobile EDS and HSD Committee of the International Consortium reviewed the current HEDS criteria and has proposed revisions. Now, the aim in 2020 is to test these revisions to see how they actually function in clinical practice compared to the current criteria. Now, these revisions are not being used to make a diagnosis, so there's no kind of formal change here. Once this work has been done looking at the suggested revisions, and then there's been analysis of the way they function in clinical practice, then there may well be further recommendations that the committee will come to. So this whole process and the analysis will take time. Ultimately, it will need to be presented and considered publicly, and that will include review of the process and the analysis at the Rome 2021 scientific meeting. And all this needs to happen before any final changes are made and the revisions introduced into clinical practice.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've received many questions about the 2017 criteria. Actually, we're going to hand back to Dr. Hakim, who's going to give us an overview to address these.
Thank you, yeah. So the society, like many other supporting organisations in our community, is very aware of the experiences that both health professionals and members of our community have had since the introduction of the 2017 criteria for hypermobile EDS. And this awareness comes from formal studies that have been published, audits of clinical practice that clinicians have shared, and clinician and patient surveys. And some of this was discussed in several abstracts and plenary sessions at the Ehlers-Danlos Ghent meeting in 2018. Now, they've all been raised with the Hypermobile EDS and HSD Committee of the International Consortium. Now, most of the concerns that were described in the questions that we received for this Ask the Society event are actually areas that we believe that the committee is already aware of. And to my mind, that's interesting, it's encouraging, because people are flagging the same concerns, that helps us to feel confident that these are areas that we should be exploring. What we'll do, though, I think, is pass on all of these questions to the committee, just so the committee can sense check that they have picked up all of these issues, but I believe they have. Now, there were also questions as to why certain signs are in the current criteria. And I think my thoughts on this are that the reasons that the authors of the HEDS 2017 criteria included certain signs in the criteria are actually presented in the paper that Dr. Brad Tinkle and colleagues published, that's available on our website. It's one of the 2017 papers. Now, the Society is also aware that the review committee is looking at all of these and considering their merit and considering other things that might need to be considered. And this review process includes an assessment of all of the latest literature on the evidence for this. I think, as I said before, any changes to the criteria will need to be tested in clinical practice before any final recommendations are presented. There were also some questions around section 3 and the exclusion criteria. And there was a particular question, or a couple of questions, on autoimmune rheumatic diseases in EDS. I think it's important that we understand, with regards to exclusions and autoimmune rheumatic disorders, that having an autoimmune rheumatic disorder doesn't exclude a person from having hypermobile EDS or vice versa. That you can have both. Now, there's a note in section 3 of the criteria that asks the clinician to consider whether certain symptoms might be due to the presence of an autoimmune rheumatic disorder rather than the hypermobility. And that if this is the case, those findings shouldn't be counted when looking at the criteria for hypermobile EDS. And this primarily affects the assessment of pain that's in section 2C, and it also affects the assessment of the cause of loose joints, because in inflammatory arthritis, there can be joint damage and soft tissue damage that leads to joint excessive mobility and instability. So that's why that flag is there, to make sure that we understand why the person has got these signs. There was another question about whether you see more autoimmune rheumatic disease in EDS compared to the general population. So my experience, and having talked with many colleagues about their experiences, is that in clinical practice, many patients with HSD or EDS will also receive a very detailed blood workup for their symptoms to identify or exclude inflammatory disorders. And so we would expect to pick up the autoimmune rheumatic diseases in our patients because we are testing for them, and that is the right thing to do. But we don't really know whether there is an increased association or not. There is no evidence for this, but there is clearly evidence that they coexist in some cases. And the really important thing about this is appreciating that they're both there, and that treatment should take account of both conditions.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so we have reached the end, and I'm sorry that we've run a little over. We just wanted to ensure that we answered all the questions that were submitted, and we are so grateful to every one of you who did submit a question. And our community's needs are what drive our mission, and it's important to us that we hear your voice, because there's been so little for us all for so long, and we're working very hard so that we start to receive the quality of life that we all really deserve. We ask that we all come together with hope and positivity. We know it will take time to heal the years of neglect that this condition has faced, but we are closer than ever before. And we also encourage that if you ever have any questions for us, or if you submitted a question after the deadline and we haven't been able to answer it, please email us at askthesociety@ehlers-danlos.com, and we will get back to you by email. Thank you all so much for listening, putting up with the background of New York City. Thank you to Susan Hawkins dialing in, Professor Fransiska Malfait, Dr. Clair Francomano, Dr. Alan Hakim. Thank you to Sarah Ritchie, who is making sure this all happens, to all the members of our board, to our incredible dynamic staff team, and to all of you for keeping our mission alive. We're grateful to you all. Thank you very much for listening. Until next time, bye-bye.